Okay, hi, I'm Brad Gray, and this video is really going to be about machine learning and simulating planetary stability. So more precisely, we're going to be talking about the source paper. The title should be listed above. A machine learns to predict the stability of tightly packed planetary systems. There's a number of authors. Those are listed right underneath the title as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the motivation, what the authors were trying to do in this paper. We'll go a little bit into the background. There's really two main features to the paper or topics to the paper, orbital stability and machine learning, hence the title. So we're going to go into some background on both of those topics. We'll discuss the methods that the authors used, the results they found, and then we'll do a little bit of discussion and analysis as far as what do we know now that we didn't know before, and how could we use this? Why is it important? So the authors here were really looking at the feasibility of using machine learning to study long-term orbital stability, and it hadn't really been used. Machine learning hadn't really been used like this before, so they were really constraining themselves just to make a simple model for the prototype, just to look at the efficiency. So they were looking at tightly packed systems, less than 10 mutual Hill radii separation between the planets, and then they were also looking at timescales of 10 to the 7th orbits of the innermost planet. So again, there are really two main topics to this paper, and we'll talk about both of those, orbital stability and machine learning. Starting with orbital stability, what exactly do we mean by that? A system is considered unstable if two or more of the bodies have a close encounter. So if one of the bodies is within the other or another body's Hill radius, that system is going to be unstable. And really what this means is if a system is unstable, but we think it's stable, then it's not really in the configuration that we think it is. Even more, planetary stability places constraints on the system, such as planetary mass, orbital eccentricity, and your inclination of the orbits. So currently, determining long-term orbital stability requires some rather complex calculations. Calculating trajectory of planets, evaluating all the forces on the planets along a time scale, and simultaneously integrating the nearby orbits. And this can be computationally expensive, and these complex in-body integrations can be time-consuming. For some recent Kepler data, calculations or the simulations along a sufficiently long time scale took a couple of weeks. In another instance, to do simulations and simulate orbits across a 5 billion year time period, it took 6 months on a supercomputer, on the Jade supercomputer. This type of complexity and effort involved in these in-body integrations is really what led the authors to looking at using machine learning to do the simulations instead. So then that leads to the question, well, what is machine learning? So it's really using computers to model data, learn from existing data, and then forecast future data. And not only can it forecast future data, but it can also sift through future data even faster, having learned on previous data. So there are a couple of various different types of machine learning, and two that we'll go over here is supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So supervised learning is really where you give the machine data, but you also give the machine the answers as well. And humans are really actively involved in this. Hence supervised learning, not only do you give it the answer, you can go through, make sure that answer is correct, and there's a bunch of parameters involved that you can adjust to try and get the answer and help the machine through its learning process. By contrast, you also have unsupervised learning, where you're just giving the machine data, no correct answers, and you see what happens. So really two main reasons for using one over the other, right? Supervised learning is good for classification. You know the groups that you want to be classified in. In this case, you're talking stable or unstable. Unsupervised is really good if you don't know the classification or you just want to see what the machine comes up with. So it's not good for classification so much as it's good for clustering. It clusters everything together. And sometimes this can show you things that you weren't quite aware of, or it can reinforce things that you were aware of in the first place. So given that this was really a classification problem and they were looking to classify these systems as stable or unstable, the authors decided to go with supervised learning. And to do this, they used, here's some of their methods, they used a data set of 5,000 integrations. And this consisted of, they went through and made all of these 3 planet systems, a solar mass star. Each planet of the 3 planet systems were 5 Earth masses apiece. Again, you were on timescales of 10 to the 7 orbits, and that's the orbital period or orbital timescale, rather, of the innermost planet. And then the semi-major axes of the planets range from 0.04 to 0.06 AU. Of course, to use a baseline and to actually know the correct answers of stable or unstable in the first place, they went ahead and performed the in-body integrations on the entire data set using some open source software. Right. So the authors spit all this data into the machine learning algorithm, and what came out? What were their results? And so you'll see above me what I think is a pretty descriptive graph, and we'll go into that. But before we do, we'll talk about more of a common way to measure the proximity of planets, and that's taking in the separation of the planet's semi-major axes and measuring that in units of their mutual Hill radii. And it's been found previously to be highly unlikely to be stable unless that separation is greater than 3.46. Now, where that comes into play in the graph above me, that is the model, or the model that's generated from that 3.46 number is the dotted black line that runs from the middle top down to the middle right. So, and this wasn't the author's model, this was done previously. And so the authors were looking for their results to somewhat mimic that, or at least get close to that. And they found that it was a little bit shy of that, but they did argue that that's because there was a different time scale used. The authors in their method used 10 to the 7th orbits, whereas that model was generated using 10 to the 9th orbits. So again, the authors are arguing that if they shift it, and had they used 10 to the 9th as well, that they would get similar or maybe even better results. So to take this even further, the authors used the same data, the same 5,000 integrations from earlier, and created a new data set by simply adding feature improvements to the data, such as semi-major axis variation, initial separation data, and normalized slope and eccentricity data. So now they really had 3 models to compare their data to. They had the 2 of theirs, the first data set and the second data set, and then the model that we saw earlier in that black line, that 3.46 number model. And you can see all 3 of those models plotted in the graph above me, with the red and the green being both of the models generated by the authors. And the red one is the second data set with all the additional feature improvements. And you can see it does fairly well. And restricting their precision rate to 0.9, they still have roughly a 0.7 recall rate, so they did get pretty good results from this. So it seems like the authors got good results, but what exactly does this mean? I feel the authors were successful in showing the potential for machine learning algorithms here. They found that the algorithms produced results 3 times faster than the in-body integrations using the same data set. And as we saw in the graph just previously, it did produce a greater area under the curve than the expected baseline model. That said, it was limited in scope, and it was limited in scope by design, but it was limited, so it still warrants further testing. And barring further successes, it should still require further validation with in-body integration. So I feel like there are really 3 things that we can take from this, and the first one is actually an aspect of machine learning itself, and that is feature importance. And that was seen throughout the study when, especially with the second data set, the authors were adding features and adjusting parameters to see how those features would affect the results and affect the accuracy of the results. And by doing so, specifically in this case, they were able to see that adding in mean motion resonance data would affect the results. And that sort of implicated some underlying physics here that they hadn't really expected. And so I think that could be definitely an applicable area or use for machine learning here. Another area I feel this could be useful is when discussing transit timing variations and stability constraints. Now, it's been shown in the past that using those two, TTVs and dynamic stability constraints, can be used to analyze Kepler data, but even more so, it can be used to confirm planets. So this study does show the potential for producing those stability constraints even faster or easier. Finally, the third thing I think we can talk about is using this data with systems that have a shorter time baseline, such as the TESS or Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. So once models have been generated accordingly, these algorithms could hold potential for these smaller data sets where the transit timing variations might not be available or the data might be insufficient. So the dynamical stability constraints could actually be a little bit more important here for providing that key motivation for further study into these systems using radial velocity methods. And so as the authors here sort of point out, machine learning could provide this analysis faster and more accurately than current methods. So to recap, this study really did just set out to show the potential benefits to using machine learning to simulate and determine long-term orbital stability. And I think overall, the algorithm used by the authors did seem to produce higher accuracy results and seem to be faster than direct integrations. However, again, as I said earlier, I do think continued cross-validation with integration data should still be required, and further computational efforts should be invested into producing a wider range of data sets. So, all right, thanks for watching.